Thank you.
Mr. Morris.
Thank you. Do you have a copy of my presentation?
I've got a copy of the McLibel Support Campaign document.
Oral summary, shorter version. No, maybe you haven't.
I don't think I do. I've got
okay. You'll have to just bear in mind then that I've reorganised it and cut it dramatically.
That's perfectly all right. I know I'm going to be provided with a copy of that, but
yes, I have sent it.
You have indeed. I acknowledge that. I will listen to what you have to say, and read it later at leisure.
Thank you. So I speak on behalf of the McLibel Support Campaign with the support of Helen Steel. We are lifelong community activists doing our best to stand up for a better future for our society and planet. We were the two co-defendants in the McDonald versus Steel and Morris libel case. It was the longest trial of any kind in English legal history. Denied legal aid, we had to represent ourselves throughout. A young barrister, Keir Starmer, now Sir Keir, offered to provide us with free legal aid. He did so behind the scenes for 10 years. The What's Wrong with McDonald's leaflets, which McDonald's were trying to suppress, became possibly the most well-known and widely distributed leaflets in history. The SDS shockingly infiltrated the campaign and secretly collaborated with McDonald's before and during the case. This was a serious miscarriage of justice. Helen should be presenting her own opening statement today, but has been unable due to unfair inquiry procedures and chronic delays in supplying completed witness packs to non-state court participants. This was too late for Helen to be able to read and respond properly to the 12,000 pages of disclosure to her, much of which related to her traumatic relationship with SDS officer John Dines. As a result, her witness statement has only just been served, and it only addresses some of the evidence she needs to give. She aims to draft a further statement. Hence, she has been effectively prevented from helping to draft this opening statement or doing her own one. The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, seems to have had a similar problem. The Home Office stating yesterday that, quote, due to the date on which the evidential bundle was received, it is not possible to address the substance of Tranche 2, Phase 2. However, the Home Office did add, quote, the Home Secretary is appalled by the historical allegations under consideration by this inquiry. The police themselves admitted last year that, quote, by modern standards, the SDS's deployments in the Tranche 1 period are unjustifiable. The inquiry interim report in June 2023 concluded, quote, the question is whether or not the end justified the means. For a unit of a police force, it did not. Had the use of these means been publicly known at the time, the 1970s, the SDS would have been brought to a rapid end. Such unjustifiable deployments continued, in fact, in secret for decades, and the unacceptable tactics employed got a whole lot worse. The Met has been found by other inquiries and reports to be institutionally racist, sexist and corrupt, and has remained under special measures since July 2022. These shocking and damning failures clearly go back decades. The police made some significant public apologies in June this year for the SDS officers' unacceptable targeting of women for sexual relationships, for the unacceptable targeting of anti-racism and family justice campaigns, and for the unacceptable abject management of the SDS. Yesterday, the police took corporate responsibility for, quote, a culture of impunity around the SDS, further apologising for the use of the identities of deceased children, for the SDS misleading courts, and for employing inappropriate language when referring to those targeted. London Greenpeace and the McLibel Support Campaign were small campaigning groups raising issues of widespread public concern and trying to create a better society for everyone. London Greenpeace was the first Greenpeace group in Europe, set up in the early 1970s. The group did all the usual things any campaign group would do. Its activities were open and didn't include any clandestine direct action. For at least 7 years, the trust and privacy of those involved in the group and its integrity was seriously abused by long-term infiltration by SDS spies. Police spy Robert Lambert was a prominent and influential activist in London Greenpeace, which he publicly summed up in 2011 as, quote, a peaceful campaigning group. He engineered sexual relationships with 4 women and fathered a child, strongly promoted and facilitated animal rights direct action, and acted as an agent provocateur. The evidence will show he placed an incendiary device in a Debenhams store. In his secret reports, he lied and lied about the supposed activities of other people, including Helen. The next police spy, John Dines, helped produce and distribute leaflets, organise events and protests, and became the group's treasurer. He cynically engineered a 2-year sexual relationship with Helen Steel, in which they lived together. He admitted this was purely to maintain cover and obtain intelligence. He has shown no remorse. The counsel to the inquiry summed this up yesterday as, quote, cold, calculating, emotional and sexual exploitation. In Dines' reports, he lied and lied about the supposed activities of other people, including Helen. These are the shocking and indisputable facts. In 1986, Lambert helped to create and distribute the group's What's Wrong with McDonald's 6-page fact sheet, the subject of the libel action. In 2011, he publicly admitted, quote, I was certainly a contributing author to the McLibel leaflet. The fact sheet focused on nutrition and diet, unethical advertising to children, exploitation of workers, cruel factory farming, environmental damage, and global poverty. And this is a copy of the fact sheet here, a 6-page fact sheet. 3 million copies of a shorter version, which I have here as well. This is the shorter version, also called What's Wrong with McDonald's. 3 million copies of that were handed out in the UK during the McLibel trial, and countless more distributed throughout the world. It was a global campaign. During 1989 to 1991, the group was infiltrated by at least 6 McDonald's spies. In 1991, John Dines admitted to senior police officers that he knew all about those spies. He said, quote, some of their agents were too old, too heavy. Others were in too much of a hurry. All were politically unaware. 4 or 5 people, employees of a private detective agency, tried to infiltrate London Greenpeace, but only the last one, a girl, got close, unquote. That so-called girl was an ex-police officer and had a fraudulent 6-month sexual relationship with one of the group. Dines has recently admitted that the SDS and McDonald's were aware of each other's infiltration. He actively facilitated McDonald's agents' access. In September 1990, McDonald's served libel writs on 5 people in the group. Helen received her writ as she stepped from Dines' van outside his bedsit. Following brief legal advice on the expense and unfairness of libel laws and proceedings, 3 of the 5 felt they had no option but to pull out. The case ran from 1990 to 2005. Just want to hold up here a photograph of Helen and I outside the High Court. Pretty much our home for about 3 years. We represented ourselves at 28 pre-trial legal hearings a 313-day trial, and a full 23-day appeal. We finally got legal aid to take the British government to the European Court of Human Rights, where we were formally represented by Keir Starmer. London Greenpeace eventually had to put its work on hold as activists had to devote their time to the McLibel case. The McLibel Support Campaign was a typical and highly successful legal and political defence campaign, which did publicity, fundraising, and so on. In the first 18 months, Dines was exploiting Helen while they lived together by getting details of our confidential legal strategy following the private meetings we held with Keir Starmer. As Dines says, quote, "It is accurate to say that I was by the side of Helen Steel and Dave Morris in 1991 and relaying the legal advice back to my bosses in the SDS." Just before the McLibel writs were served, Dines reported that the leaflet, quote, "is causing much concern within the corporation." Quote, "Arrangements are in hand to monitor events arising from these legal proceedings," unquote. He then reports on the first confidential conversation of those served with the writs, and then about our private meeting with solicitor Tim Green. 3 days later, his report attacked the personal and professional integrity of Tim Green, who is now a circuit judge, and refers to his contacts with Keir Starmer. More reports followed. The SDS were clearly secretly communicating back to McDonald's, providing them with an advantage on whether or how to pursue the controversial litigation. But it gets even more shocking. In June 1990, one of the McDonald spies and a special branch officer had held 2 long meetings sharing personal and private information about people in London Greenpeace, termed, quote, "the anti-McDonald's group." Sid Nicholson, McDonald's vice president, was a Metropolitan Police chief superintendent for Brixton area until he joined McDonald's in 1983. He took personal responsibility for hiring and overseeing the McDonald's spying operation. He testified during the McLibel trial that McDonald's security personnel were, quote, "all ex-police," and that if he needed information on protesters, he could go to former colleagues. Terry Carroll, also a senior officer in Brixton Police until 1984, was brought in by Nicholson to become a McDonald's security manager. In 2013, he admitted, quote, "I was aware that Sid would liaise with special branch officers about the protesters. I do recall that Sid once said there was an SB bloke in London Greenpeace." In October 1989, he and a special branch officer were photographed at McDonald's headquarters watching those attending a London Greenpeace peaceful protest outside. Dines and a McDonald's spy were taking part in the protest. Carroll sent a memo to Nicholson a week after the service of the McLibel writs, on which he had written, quote, "I will get onto special branch to get an assessment." As Helen notes in her statement, Lambert was a C Squad officer with special responsibility for the Brixton area during the period Sid Nicholson was in charge of Brixton Police. It is highly likely they knew each other. And the father of SDS officer Jim Boyling was also a senior police officer in Brixton in the early 1980s. We call on the inquiry to investigate the web of secret corporate police collaboration and subterfuge and Lambert's likely leading role. However, this can of worms gets even worse. McDonald's intended to sue everyone in the anti-McDonald's campaign in 1990, which obviously would have included John Dines. In the 1997 McLibel judgment, Justice Bell stated that Nicholson had testified that McDonald's would have to sue, quote, as many people as possible of the responsible individuals within Greenpeace London, since action against only some of them might leave others feeling free to continue publication, unquote. The year before the service of the writ, while McDonald's agents were infiltrating and gathering intelligence on who was involved with the campaign, Dines attended 18 meetings and I attended only 8. He was more heavily in the McDonald's campaign than Helen, while significantly, and ironically as it turned out, I was calling for the group to move on from the McDonald's campaigning. Yet Dines wasn't sued by McDonald's, and we were. Later, in 2002, a police file note revealed the following explosive information. The SDS had ensured that Dines' name, quote, was deliberately omitted from the McDonald's libel writ list. This is blatant interference with and manipulation of the legal process. From late 1991, Dines cynically faked a mental breakdown and finally disappeared in 1992, falsely claiming to his partner Helen that he'd gone abroad. This caused her great heartache and trauma, and she spent many years trying to trace him. By 1995, Lambert, now promoted to SDS manager, reported he was very concerned that Helen might find out the truth about her ex-partner. If so, quote, they, that is myself, Helen and Keir Starmer, would give serious consideration to subpoenaing John Dines and or the Commissioner to give evidence at the McDonald's libel case. In 1998, Helen and I successfully sued the police over what little we knew at the time, the special branch providing private details about us to McDonald's. We applied for disclosure of all relevant documents and were told there were only 24. This was lies. The inquiry disclosure proves that hundreds should have been released to us. In 2000, the Met agreed to pay us £10,000 plus our legal costs in order to avoid what they called, quote, a difficult and lengthy trial, unquote. And most significantly, quote, to bring this settlement to the attention of the 3 area commanders of the Metropolitan Police and ask them to remind their officers of their responsibility not to disclose information on the police national computer to a third party. We now can see that the reference to the police national computer was a weasel-worded smokescreen to conceal the SDS operations. Had the true picture been known, we may well have not have settled the claim. We call on the inquiry to fully investigate this cover-up. In 1997, the High Court and then the Court of Appeal finally ruled that McDonald's, quote, exploited children with their advertising, produced misleading advertising claiming their food was nutritious, that their regular customers faced an increased risk of heart disease, that McDonald's were, quote, culpably responsible for cruelty to animals and helped to lower wages in the catering industry. The judgment also set out McDonald's responsibility for industrial-scale breaches of employment and animal welfare laws in the 1980s and 1990s. Why weren't McDonald's prosecuted? Why hadn't the SDS been deployed against McDonald's rather than their critics? In 2005, the European Court of Human Rights ruled in our favour against the British government that the McLibel case had violated our right to a fair hearing and freedom of expression. The UK government opposed us there, whilst concealing the outrageous state involvement in the case. Looking back, Was the purpose of the STS and McDonald's collaboration over the McLibel case to derail and possibly destroy London Greenpeace? It certainly had real consequences. Not only Helen and myself, but also Keir Starmer had to put in years of unpaid and intense work to help defend the action. Helen and I had £60,000 damages awarded against us due to the points we lost in the case, which we refused to pay. For Helen, the stress of fighting the case was magnified by the trauma of Dine's fake breakdown, her concern and her efforts to trace him. She then had to deal with the additional trauma of gradually uncovering the shocking truth. My stress doesn't compare with what she was put through, but it did have a big impact on my life as a single parent. London Greenpeace never fully recovered afterwards, and its activities gradually fizzled out. It is shocking that the longest case in English history was tainted by police interference, showing their utter disregard for the integrity of legal proceedings. We are happy to assist the inquiry further regarding this miscarriage of justice. It is essential that people everywhere are encouraged to challenge unacceptable government and capitalist policies and practices harming society, and to seek to create a better society. Unfortunately, to do this, we also have to challenge oppressive laws and policing. Protests and movements for change also enable people to educate and empower ourselves and each other, promote collective self-organisation, mutual aid and community solidarity, and show there are alternative and better ways of living and running our society together. This is real democracy in action. Thank you.
Thank you very much.